Before we start this podcast, I want to definitely remind you of a sponsor for Fresh of the Word, 20 by 20 Apparel. Founded in 2015, 20 by 20 Apparel brings original tributes to pro wrestling's classic arenas, moments, and events. They look to spotlight the bloopers, bleeps, and body slams along with the biggest, smallest, strangest, and strongest. In the world of wrestling where there's hundreds of shirts, promotions, flyers, social media accounts, and ads, don't get lost in the sea of parody shirts and display fonts. They can provide professional graphic design services at a reasonable price. 20 by 20 also hand screen prints all the tees in-house. So if you'd like to discuss a possible run of tees, posters, koozies, foam fingers, or even Zubaz, then drop them a line at 20by20apparel.com. That's the number 20x, the number 20apparel.com. And also check out their enamel pin line. It's super cool.
Fresh is the word.
I'm Jim Duggan, got long wood for plenty hoes. I keep it fresher than fresh, but you already know. You suckers bum me, I'm money, I got a ton of flows. My weed loud like a motherfucking thunder roll. Your shit quiet like you ballin' on a budget though. We see your kicks and we laugh and yellin' what it goes. You see me shining like a suit on puffy. You know my grind, this shit is too strong, buddy. That's why the dude call money. I be stuntin' like it's nothing at all. Cause it's nothing to me, it's probably something to y'all. Trying to smoke like me, then come and fuck with your dog. Got a closet full of kicks, you can't cop it tomorrow. And I'm fresher than the freshest, you can tell it's in my essence. Bitch, you see the way I'm rapping, yes I do this shit to death. I tell I'm running out of breath, I tell somebody cut a check. But either way you know it's fresh, and either way you know it's fresh. Fresh, we fresh. Fresh, 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 goddammit, we fresh. Fresh, fresh, goddammit, we so damn fresh.
Welcome to the Fresh of the Word podcast. I'm your host, Kelly K. Fresh Frazier. And like always, we have the freshest of guests for you. And the guest for this episode is multi-certified sex and relationship educator, Dreamworker, sex toy expert, sex-positive publicist, and founder of EDSE, which means Everyone Deserves Sex Ed, the amazing and Hodder-Shipp. And during our conversation, she shared with us her own experiences that led to her become a sex educator and publicist, her interest in sex education at a young age, gender identity, learning from other communities, the common issues that people and couples need help with in regards to relationship education, and her work as a sex-positive publicist. So, without further ado, let's get into this interview with Ann Hodder-Shipp. Yeah, like you were somebody that I came across when I was, because of A.V. Flox's book, and that Brian had sent over, and I was like, the more I looked into your stuff, I was like, dude, this person's awesome. I want to talk to her. Like, she's so interesting about everything that she does, and there's like so much to sort of talk about, but like. Everything that you're doing now in regards to being a publicist and a educator in regards to sex and relationships, it just kind of came from your own sort of, issues with yourself and where you were in life. Kind of talk about that.
Yeah, sure. Well, I kind of have like two jobs. I do publicity for sexuality related companies, partly because I'm good at that. I started the company probably 10 years ago, but that is what helps sort of fund all of the sex education work that I do, because it is, there's a lot of, low or no cost service work that, sex education does involve. And so that's how I sort of make that work. Being a publicist was a total accident. I was a journalist and I focused on sex, sexuality in the adult industry. And when it became clear that there was really no more room to grow for me in that side of the business, I just kind of broke away. I left the magazine that I was an editor for, and I just started letting different sex toy companies and adult industry companies know that I was sort of a free agent and I could help them with various, writing and messaging stuff because I was a professional journalist. And I didn't expect everybody to jump at the chance, but they were all just like, oh yes, let's do it. And so I sort of accidentally started this PR firm called Hodder-Media, and we just happened to specialize in talking about sex and sexuality and porn and anything that is, also cannabis and CBD most recently, the stuff that kind of is considered maybe taboo or stigmatized, and maybe a traditional publicist who likes to, promote beauty products or, shoes wouldn't necessarily know how to handle it. And then in terms of the sex ed and sexuality research stuff, I've just always been doing that even since I was a kid. There wasn't a lot of conversation going on about what sex is and how your body is supposed to work and, all of the kind of necessary stuff. The conversations weren't happening, but I was very much aware that stuff was going on in my body. And I didn't even know, I was masturbating from a very young age, but I didn't know what it was. It wasn't oh, I am going to masturbate now. It's just yeah. you're a 7-year-old and you're it feels good when I touch here. So I'm going to do it all the time. And so I spent a lot of time at the library. We did not have the internet. That is how old I am. Believe it or not, it's so funny when I talk to young people. It's the internet did not always exist, everybody.
Oh, yeah, right. Yeah.
So I did the sort of analog internet, and I would go to the library and use the card catalog, and there was a very small section of books about sex, and I would just sort of casually, or at least I thought I was casual, walk over to that area and pick out a book and just kind of read. And I didn't know, I wasn't looking for stuff, I wasn't a 10-year-old researcher, but I just knew that I liked what I was reading and it was interesting. It, in some ways, it was a turn on to read some of it. So for sure, some of it was just self-serving. But also some of it was just it provided context and a different kind of conversation about what I was experiencing. And I was really lucky because I didn't have any other opinions or values or conversations happening to counter that. So on the one hand, it was very lonely, and certainly a young kid shouldn't have to kind of parent themselves in that way.
Right.
But on the other hand, no one else really got in my way. And so I got really used to taking control of my own situation, my own thoughts, answering my own questions, not even really knowing if there was any place else to go to ask for help. So I would just, do that kind of classic, well, I'll just do it myself. And so by the time I was in college and journalism school, I was very much any type of sociology class that discussed gender and social norms I took, and almost to the point of having a sociology minor. And then they only had one human sexuality course in the entire college. And so, of course, I took that. And I just sort of figured, wouldn't it be cool if I could use my journalism degree in this way? But yeah, I don't see how that would actually happen.
You're right.
And then I graduated probably a year later. I moved to Los Angeles and was working at a horrible online magazine writing about shoes and celebrity fashion bullshit. And I realized I had to leave, and I saw a job ad for a magazine that covered the business of adult and, not the sexy stuff, but new releases or what business deals were going on between studios.
Yeah.
And so I applied, got the job, and that sort of started the career side of working in sexuality. And it's kind of all just morphed into this very sort of accidental but very interesting combo deal where it's all about sex that I do, but it's either, on the one hand, it's working with people and teaching and coaching people, and then on the other hand, it's trying to get magazines and media outlets to write about subjects or people or products in a way that is more informative and maybe a little bit less hooking into stereotypes and stuff like that to try to, get clicks.
Yeah. When you were growing
That's
up,
the long of it.
Yeah, when you were growing up and sort of learning this stuff by yourself, was there anybody that you could share this knowledge with?
No, it didn't even occur to me because I don't really know if I would have considered it knowledge. It was really just sort of stuff for me, you know? And I don't even remember really anyone having conversations about sex or even puberty beyond, you know, the obligatory class that is really poorly structured.
Right.
And everyone's embarrassed, so no one's talking about it anyway. I do remember getting messages pretty early on that if you do know something, or if you do have a question, or if you learn something, it's secretive and don't share it. So I do remember the puberty talk where they separate the guys and the girls as though there's only two categories of humans. And like the boy side had a very different conversation than the girl side. And I didn't know what the boy side was, but I was certainly fucking curious. And on my side, it was very much just like, you know, periods and basically, you know, good luck. This sucks until
Right.
you're 50. And here's what a giant diaper pad looks like. So, you know, best of luck. See ya. And I remember going back to class and telling one of the boys, well, here's what our side was. This is what we learned. And I thought it was interesting. And it was like, there was something kind of titillating about sharing this, knowing that he like the only reason why he would know this is because I told him. Like there was clearly some interest and excitement about being an educator even back then.
Yeah.
And I remember getting in big trouble as though talking about periods and menstruation and ovulation were like sexy, like dirty talk. And it was just sort of like, are you kidding me? And so I just, you know, those are the kind of messages that many of us get when we're really little. And it sets us up for teenagehood and adulthood where we feel very much like separate from other people and that no one will ever understand us, and nor should they, because these are secret things that only we deal with. And that's why we're all having, you know, shitty relationships and bad sex.
Oh, yeah, definitely. The amount of bad sex and relationship information I heard growing up and then up until how recently is astounding, and I've had to do so much deprogramming in my life.
Mm-hmm. And good for you. I don't think a lot of people realize that that's even an option, you know?
Right. When you were younger, when you learning about all these things by yourself, do you think anything that you learned by yourself kind of helped you from going through some things that your typical like teenager would go through?
It's possible. I think that in some ways it's kind of hard to even remember what it was even really like back then. A lot of my memories are kind of hazy, but I think it helped me because I didn't have anyone else trying to impose belief systems on me. But at the same time, I was on my own creating very rigid belief systems for myself.
Yeah.
So in some ways, the grass is always greener, you know, and I wouldn't say it was better or worse, but I already was incredibly susceptible to other people's opinions of me. So I feel like if I had also gotten opinions about my own sense of identity, that could have been extremely harmful. But also at the same time, you know, there is something about, you know, being a young person, taking care of yourself in that way is you grow up really fast.
Yeah.
And you kind of become an adult before you're supposed to be one. And especially, you know, and so my coping mechanisms, I suppose, were creating these rules and belief systems that were really strict because in some ways that gave me a sense of control.
Yeah.
And especially when you're a teenager, you have no control over anything. Your body is just all over the fucking place. You don't even understand why because no one will tell you.
Yeah.
And you're just told, don't do this, don't do that because they said so. And it's just like, what? You know, what the fuck? So that's, you know, a lot of my belief system stuff ended up being about like what counts as attractive or sexy and what counts as like what do you have to do to earn or deserve someone else's attention or respect or love or attraction. And so definitely some scrambled messages there, but they all came from they were the result of me reading stuff and then it going through teenage Anne filter, and then I would receive the info as how I deciphered it. And without having an older person, like a trusted adult, to kind of like help you navigate that, you might actually be totally scrambling yourself in a different way. And then there's deprogramming about that ends up having to happen when you're older.
Do you feel like having those sort of rigid beliefs that you filtered through all this information that you were receiving, did it isolate you at all from your peers? How did you react when, your typical like teenage boy was, just trying to get laid and trying to holler at you?
Well, I appreciate the question because in all honesty, in some ways it felt isolating, but I didn't feel sad about it because I wasn't really experiencing a lot of external attention. Like, using your words, I was not hollered at all when I was growing up. I was very much, I thought I was cool and fun. I was very much, aware of other people's, like I built social skills in order to, survive school because my physical appearance did not appear to be appealing to the people around me. And so I desperately wanted that kind of attention because it would have made me feel, validated and all that shit. But I didn't get it. And so in order to feel worthy of other people's attention, I learned how to like tell stories and be funny. And in my brain, give them a reason to want me around because somehow me just as myself was, no way. Like, why would anyone want that? So those were some of those belief systems because my body, I was taller than everyone. I was bigger than everyone. I had an incredibly vibrant sense of style, but I couldn't find clothes that would fit my body. This was before sizes at women's clothing stores went above a size 12. This is before, Torrid and Old Navy went up to, 4XL. So I had to either make some clothes, and I didn't have a talent for that, or I would have to wear men's clothes and just find a way to wear cool shoes or play with makeup and hair because that was something that didn't require a certain size. So as a result, like I very much stood out from the other girls in my school and, or at least the girls that I was aware of and thought were the girls I saw getting the kind of attention I wanted. I was very much like a 180 from them. And so I didn't really have the challenge of trying to reconcile with how I felt, with how I was being treated, because people were basically treating me as the weird, funny girl who had, something to say. And not everyone wanted that around either. But that was, that became like the identity. And I guess the consequence of all of that is then into, college, and as I started shifting, not really my beliefs, but just my environment shifted, and people, it wasn't such a restrictive, like there were more people to meet, therefore more people to sort of like experiment with. I really just kind of like, I never really seemed to be super impacted by men's attention around me, or I didn't feel the impact until much later, but I definitely would receive and accept treatment from men because I dated men. I was very much felt like super, super hetero until really only recently. And I was very much taught that like men's attention is the thing that you need. That's all you need.
Yeah.
So I would really just like for lack of a better word, my standards were incredibly low. If anyone with a penis gave me attention, I'd be like, all right, let's see if I can like them back because this might be the last one,
Yeah, I think I was kind of the same way with girls. Like I was so shy and confused about so much things because I felt like, I never, stood in like your typical, thing that your regular normal teenager or young adult, because recently I finally like realized and came out that that I'm queer and that I'm and that I'm gender non-binary. I'm queer sexuality in a sense where I still very much prefer women, but it just doesn't stop there. And then, but I think I was more so all these years looking for gender identity, and that's what I was looking for. But there was no discussions about that until recently, and that's when I was like, okay, I've been thinking, am I gay or not all these years? But what I was looking for was more gender identity because I have this strong feminine side that I really connect with, and I don't know what that is. So growing up, I was always in that gray area of everything, but there was no discussions about what it was. So all that weird shit that guys tell you about dating and sex, it made no sense to me at all. And looking back was such horrible advice, and I had to just sort of deprogram myself.
Oh, wow. That sounds really overwhelming.
It was like, because it was just like I was always frustrated about what I wanted, why I wasn't feeling a certain way. And it's just like, but there was no the only like discussions in regards to like sort of gender identity always had to do with like androgynous figures, and they're usually they were rock stars like David Bowie.
David Bowie, right? Yep.
Like, so, and if you were anything like that, you were a freak. And but none of it ever got past that, into just like, hey, I can look like a regular just Joe Schmo off the street, but I can have this gender identity, like that I'm of this gender identity where I can sort of be more myself because I can embrace my masculine and my feminine side. But those discussions didn't happen until just recently, and it just clicked in my head. I'm like, oh, this is what I've been looking for. And then all that stuff sort of like answered other questions I was having in my life. It answered questions about my sexuality. It answered questions about what I wanted to do in life and stuff like that. So there's all these like we were talking before, like in the sex education and stuff like that when we were kids. That just is so awful that you're just like even more confused.
Yep.
It's crazy. I'm just like, all right, like thinking back what I know now in comparison to what I knew 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago is so like crazy different, And a lot of it too.
Oh, yeah.
And a lot of it too also, like I mentioned at the beginning, was when I quit drinking, and little after, probably about 4 or 5 months afterwards, I started to feel my body change back, I guess, to what it should be. And there was a lot of those like feelings about attraction and sex drive and stuff like that were kind of numbed by alcohol, that were causing those questions also, about my sexual identity. So it's crazy about how many things in these subjects kind of are linked together that many people don't realize.
Oh, 100%. I thank you for sharing all of that. It makes a lot of sense. I think that sobriety is a thing that can be really tricky for people when it comes to, well, what does it mean about me and dating and sex then? Like, who am I without the substance? Because for a lot of people, whether it was, drugs, booze, or something else, like that was the thing that helped them, among other things, have sex with people. And some people, I do a lot of work with newly sober people, and they, first off, are confused why there's someone talking about sexuality in a rehab, as though it's like they can't even connect the dots between, recovery and making a huge life change like that, and also learning about who you are. Like, who are you without that in your life? And then also it doesn't occur to them to connect the dots about, oh, interesting, how did I use this thing in my relationships? How did I use this thing in my sexual expression? You know, did I depend on this in ways that I didn't even think about? And it's like, and people, there's some people, you know, I've worked with who eventually realized that, oh shit, I used this every time I had sex. Like it was just a normal thing. It was like, wash my hands, get the lube, take a pill, do a line, whatever, and then go to town with this person. And then they're like, I don't know actually when the last time I had sober sex even was. And then they have this total flip, and they think that sex without the substance is somehow going to be boring or unpleasurable or terrifying, or they're not even going to want to have sex, because how do they want sex without having this extra, you know, oomph in their system? And then the ones that just kind of power through all of those very valid fears eventually come to a place that you did, where they're like, oh my God, that thing that I was depending on actually made sex horrible. Like, I don't even remember half of it. And it muted all of my sensations. Like, it muted my fear. Great, that's what you wanted. But it also muted your fucking orgasm, and it muted your actual receiving of pleasure, because you can't numb. There's no pill that numbs one feeling but then amps up the other, you know? Right. And so then, like, you know, a year in, they're like, oh my God, it's a completely, yes, it's terrifying because it's new territory, but like the way sex happens for me is now, it's completely different. It's nothing I ever would have imagined. And, you know, I'm just so glad that I stuck with it.
Yeah, right. It was like, when I was still drinking, like, I was like always like, how come I don't feel these things that like so many other dudes like are like feeling, you know? I'm not like like horny all the time. I'm not like it's shit like that. And then once I stopped like drinking, like months down the line, I was like, hey, I'm starting to feel those feelings that I'd never thought before. I'm like, dude, alcohol must have like, I already knew when I was drinking that, and the funny thing is, this actually took a long time for me to connect the dots, is that pretty much when I instantly started drinking, like I totally went to Whiskey Dick Town, and that took a long time for me to put the two and two together. But then I didn't realize how much more alcohol was affecting it, to where it was just numbing all those sort of like sexual and attractive tendencies also, you know? So
totally.
it was like super it was like super like overwhelming to like finally realize that and finally feel that. I was like, oh my goodness, I thought there was something weird, something wrong with me. And it's crazy.
Yeah, which then probably made you want to drink more, because you're like, oh fuck, this sucks, I'm broken or whatever. Let's
right.
have another drink.
Yeah, because I was definitely one of those people that started drinking socially, because I was, you know, part of a active music scene, but I was super shy, and I was in this shell. And when I started drinking, I came out of that shell eventually, and it, you know, it for a little while it helped me, but then like all things like that, there is a point when it starts going against you.
Totally.
And it's no longer helpful. And I definitely, you know, went through those years. So when I finally quit, I was like, holy crap, look at all these things that I never really felt before. Like my body was super sensitive to all of this. And now I'm like, I'm feeling these feelings and urges that I should have been feeling.
Yeah. Well, how do you feel about that now?
I feel great about it all. I feel it sucks that it took me so long, but I'm glad that I'm at a point to where I started feeling those feelings. But then, you know, once I quit drinking, like a year later, I started going to therapy, and that helped a lot. Then a year after that, sure, I started taking medication, and that helped even more. And and that opened me up to a lot of ideas and stuff like that. And that's where I finally came to grips to where I found out my identity more, is that through all those steps of, you know, quit drinking, therapy, medication, and it all, and I'm at this point where and I wrote this long essay on my website about, you know, coming out as queer and what it, and explained it. But there was all these different parts, and people actually like connected to different parts. I had a part about therapy, and a part about community, you know, people that I've met, and people about, and a part about sobriety. And people had questions of me about all that different stuff. They didn't just hang on to the queer thing. They were asking about the other things. So all those things, you know, finally led me to this thing of finding my identity. And when I finally, you know, just let it out to the world, like it was like this weight had lifted off my shoulders that I didn't know was there. And I'm at this point where I can I'm like interested in so many, I'm like more confident, and it's actually, and I'm getting past a lot of the goals that we set in therapy, and it's been really good.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah, and that's why I like talking with people like you, because it's like there's another part of all of this that got me to this place, is that I've read books, I've listened to podcasts where you know, with people who are sex educators, various people, you know, from the LGBTQ community. I've been a part of like this comic book creator community, and there's a lot of queer folks in there that have their own identity of what queer is, you know, and and through all of that, that's how I learned more so what my identity was a lot of, it had to do with, you know, people in sex work. It had to be people who are sex educators. It was like all these things where I learned. Hell, I even learned things from, you know, listen to podcasts about motherhood, you know, and all of that really reinforced that I have this feminine side that I really like to embrace, and I realized I'm like, that's where my answers came from, is like, yeah, I connect more with people like you who do what you do, rather than, you know, certain other types of people, you know, certain men or whatever, you know, and that's where I found my identity, is through all those different channels.
Yeah, that makes total sense. I think that a lot of the healing that we need will end up coming from community, but very specifically like building one that works for you. And what that ultimately means is, like what you did, you have to go outside of your current circle, because clearly the current circle is not working, you know, or it's not enough, and it's not nourishing you in some way. And then go into the circles where you feel like an outsider, like the ones that you either feel like you don't belong, or the ones that you feel curious about, or the ones that you feel judgy about. And you find ways to learn about those communities that still leaves you, you know, so you still feel safe doing it, but like lets you hear about their experiences. That's how you start learning, oh shit, here's like 14 other perspectives on life that I've never heard before and never would have had I not done the work to reach out and learn and ask and receive. And I think podcasts are a fantastic way to dip into these different communities from the safety and comfort of your house or your car or whatever, your headphones, and start the path, because you start to like hear from people that you may not have even known you needed to hear from. And it's also fantastic to listen to podcasts about subject matter that seems like it would never apply to you, like you with the motherhood stuff.
Yeah.
It's so valuable, because I think a lot of people are like, oh, I'm not going to be a mom. Ugh, I'm not going to listen to that. That's dumb. But actually, those fucking podcasts are not just talking about being a mom. It's talking about all of the internal conflict and the feelings, and the feelings of fear or lack of safety, or excitement and joy, and the sticky, gross, you know, complicated, messy stuff that we don't get to hear about anywhere else. And it really helps you form a much more well-rounded perspective, not just on like the world at large, but also about your fellow person, which also means you feel more of a connection to your fellow person.
Yeah.
And then you start realizing, oh, shit, I actually have a connection to that thing that this person just said. And I don't really know why, but it seems like I should explore that more. And that's when you can then start, follow that person on social media. See if they have workshops and, things you can watch and listen to or read online that they've done. And then you get to see, well, who follows them or who do they follow? And you start to follow the breadcrumbs toward more people who exist to help you. Part of their job is to help their listeners and their followers learn and expand and benefit from the skills and stories that they're putting out there.
Right. The moment that it clicked in my head that I was genderqueer, non-binary, was that I was listening to a podcast. I was listening to Allison Rosen's podcast, and she had this author, Teresa Thorne, on there, who's co-host of the One Bad Mothers podcast. And she was talking about her journey with her child, who was going through her gender identity as a little child, and how she's in this point of being a trans girl and performative trans, and everything she talked about in regards to her experience dealing with it rang so clear in my head also, and it just clicked. And I'm at work with my earbuds on, and I'm like, holy shit, oh my God. I wanted to leave work and just go tell everybody or do something. I was just all of a sudden really antsy, and I wanted to just go explore this feeling that I was having at that point. So yeah, it's just there's all these things that in regards to gender and sexuality, and there's so many things that are interwoven that you never know where you're going to get that inspiration or that thing that unlocks your brain.
It's so true.
With in regards to the stuff that you do in regards to sex and relationship education, what are the types of things, what are the common things that people come to you with that you feel that you need to help, that they're looking for help with?
Well, it's kind of a variety of things, because oftentimes what brings a client in is not what actually ends up being the thing they need support with.
Right.
So, for instance, I had a couple come in and they wanted to explore non-monogamy in their long-term marriage. And so I was like, okay, great. What's your current, what's the relationship like right now? And they started talking about it, and it became very clear that one of the reasons why their current experimentation in non-monogamy was being such a disaster was because they didn't know how to communicate, and they didn't have any boundaries with one another. And so it became less about, let's find a framework for non-monogamy that works for you both, and it became more about, let's figure out why it's so challenging for you to talk to each other about anything. And how do boundaries, what's your current relationship to boundaries? Because the only way non-monogamy works is through really clear parameters and limits. And if one or the other doesn't set any, you are setting yourself up for potential harm. And so then the sessions became about the dynamic in general and had nothing to do with, relationships outside of the marriage. I also have people who come in and they want support with dating, and they, can't understand why they can't find someone who works for them, and they can't understand this or that, and why is dating so awful. And so we talk about it, and I validate it. Dating sucks. In most of the time, dating is challenging for most people, especially in cities like Los Angeles. I hear this a lot. I hear this about New York City as well. I'm sure it's everywhere.
Right.
It's hard to date in general, but especially in big cities where there is a certain type of I don't know, like an energy and a perspective on human interaction, where it's sort of like commodified and it's, you see it as sort of like a task or a game more so than like a genuine, attempt at human connection.
Right.
So we talk about that, but then we end up breaking down, oh, interesting, maybe the problem isn't just, oh, Los Angeles or New York sucks. It's, oh, after every first date, you never reply to their goodnight text, or you wait for them to ask you out, you never reach out to someone that you like.
Right.
Okay, interesting. Here are some symptoms of your outcome, and that can't really be blamed on anyone else but yourself.
Yeah.
Of course, blame is a word I don't really like using, but you're responsible for that. Like, that's your contribution.
There was all those rules about dating that
life.
we learned like through TV and stupid shit,
right?
That we actually took like as gospel.
Oh, of course, because we didn't know, like, where else are we going to go? Where else is the gospel, right? Like, nowhere. So our parents and caregivers certainly were not, like, pros at telling us how relationships are supposed to look. And so we're going to look elsewhere. And so ultimately we're going to, like, where is it a free and abundant resource? Like the internet or TV or movies. And we see a lot of really, like, curated, fictionalized representation of how relationships and dating are supposed to look, but we don't necessarily have any reason to question that. There's nothing to counter that with. So we, consciously or not, receive that as how it's supposed to be, and that becomes our expectation. And then if something is even slightly out of that expectation, a lot of us see that as red alert. Oh God, red flag. Get out of here. Let's run. And we end up just staying in this pattern where it becomes really easy to just blame everything else, where what really ends up being more helpful is, well, what is my current, like, what's my education about relationships? Who was my teacher? Who were my first teachers? What did I learn? What do I believe to be true right now? And is there any space to consider the possibility that some of those truths might actually be complete bullshit?
Right.
And if so, all right, now our sessions are going to be less about how to write your dating profile in a compelling way and more about what do I need to deprogram in myself in order to have better experiences with other people. Because the only thing we can control is how we interact in these situations. We can't do anything to control the other person's behavior. We can do our hair, we can learn 10 languages, we can read all the dating books about how to be performatively appealing or kind or chivalrous or whatever the word you want to use would be. That doesn't guarantee the person is going to look at you and say, oh my God, I love you, let's have a second date. Like, none of that, that's not how any of it works. So what you end up having to do is, all right, am I clear on what I want? How do I want to behave on my dates that make me feel good about me, not about anything else?
Yeah.
And what tools do I need to practice and prepare now so that when I'm rejected, not if, but when I'm rejected or when I have a shitty date or when someone is an asshole to me, I know how to respond to that in a way that doesn't put myself in a bad situation or doesn't end up putting me back into old teenage patterns of self-loathing. And that is the thing that really ends up making navigating sex, dating, and relationships a lot more doable because you are empowered to take control of what you can and then say fuck off to the rest.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like when I was going through therapy, dating was like a big issue. And one of the things that my therapist always said is that you just got to, be cool with, coming off like an idiot and know how to react to that if things don't work out. Mm-hmm. And
it's great advice. We're all going to look like a total weirdo. We're all going to be awkward. We're all going to stumble. We're all going to say the wrong thing. We're all going to fart when we don't want to be farting. Like, we're all going to be doing that.
Yes.
So instead of trying to avoid the inevitable, because it's literally impossible, let's just shift and try to focus on something that's more controllable. Like, what do I do if I say the wrong thing or the person doesn't laugh at my joke? Like, how do I sit there and be okay with that and maybe even laugh at that instead?
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. One of the other things that, when I started, looking down your resume that really sort of, came out to me is we talked about it a little bit, is the sex positive PR. And as someone like me who does a podcast and also is definitely I'm so sort of interested in getting more and more obsessed with like just learning about sex, love, relationships, the inner workings of sex work, of gender identity and stuff like that. What is, and you said that like you just kind of like fell into this sort of role, but like those are still topics that are, very much taboo to a lot of people. There's still a stigma attached to a lot of things that are around sexuality and sex. How do you go about spinning these sort of topics to make them, seem like a good fit for publications or websites or whatever?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think, what I try to do is, traditionally, PR is all about finding the sort of clickbait type hook that will get someone's attention. And when it comes to sex, historically, that has always been, hooking into someone's insecurity or fear or curiosity, and say something or write something that will evoke an emotional response, even if it's outrage. All of it is good PR, right? And so when me coming in, I'm very much the antithesis of that. Like, it makes my skin crawl. But I have to find a way to still get people's attention without perpetuating the same type of stereotype or the same fear tactics that other publicists or other publications might use. And so usually that comes into thinking about, like, culturally what is being talked about at the moment. Well, what's being tweeted about, what's happening, who said something, specific or ridiculous on TV about their sex life. What did Gwyneth Paltrow say again about vaginas? That kind of thing. And then find a way to sort of to connect my client or my client's product into that conversation without validating the bullshit in that conversation. Usually when there's some kind of contradiction, like this expert says so-and-so can go kick rocks because, blah, 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 or so-and-so says the key to fantastic sex isn't shoving rocks up your pussy. And it's something like that.
Right.
And that's referring to, of course, the jade egg thing with Goop and Gwyneth Paltrow.
Yeah.
Explanatory comma for listeners, just in case. And that is the thing that tends to get a little bit more traction without me having to compromise my own values as a person. There's something that, my job can sometimes be a little bit more difficult because I choose to, because I'm also a sex educator, like I choose to maintain sex positive values with my work. But also it tends to then attract clientele who also give a shit about that. Like they also care about shifting the conversation and not perpetuating myths and not banking on people's fear and insecurity in order to buy their product. And so it works out for me and it works out for them. And then also at the end of the day, like there's so much sex toy related stuff out there. A lot of my clients are sex toy manufacturers. And also there's a ton of cannabis out there. Like the market is really, really saturated. And so there's also this acceptance where, I might, even if I have like the perfect pitch or angle, it still might not guarantee that the editor is going to read it and listen because they've got 40 others to read.
Yeah.
And so at that point, it's maintaining the relationships with the writers so they know that when they hear from me or they hear from like Brian Gross, my friend who I think ultimately helped us connect. When they hear from us, they know they're going to have quality content. They know that we're going to be giving it to them way before deadline. They know that the people we work with are on point they have something to say, they've got good sound bites, and that they can rely on us for a really good story. And that ends up being even more valuable than like the creative pitching. And I think part of the success with that is just people like us, we stick to our values and what's important, and we don't let anything else kind of shift us or waver us. And as a result, what we put out there is consistently good. And, for media outlets who need to try to compete with one another, you want to try to have a good quality message out there, and maybe that's the thing that stands out from their competition.
Yeah, definitely. That's what I kind of got from you, is that you're spreading something that, these are stories, these are products that there's going to be something genuine about them. They're not going to be, there's not going to be any sort of negativity connected to it. And that's what I really sort of like enjoyed about seeing your content, seeing the people that you work with and everything. And I'm like, yo, that's kind of cool. That's the type of stuff that I'm looking for.
Mm-hmm. Well, great. I'm glad to hear it. That's the goal.
So, before we get out of here, sometimes I like to ask my guests the same question. I did give it to you ahead of time to think about. Who is somebody that I could realistically interview for this podcast that would have some good stories or lessons to talk about?
I mean, gosh, there are so many, especially in the sexuality world. There are so many of us who are good at, good sex educators, but also have specialties.
Yeah.
So, for instance, there's an educator named Elle Chase who her whole story and then the work she does now is very focused on understanding body image and what it really means and how body image impacts your own sense of self and sexuality as well as sensuality. And she really breaks all that down. And she has a really fantastic story about her own relationship to her body as well as her own sexuality and how the two of them have intersected. And she's actually teaching in Albuquerque this weekend, but so much of her work is helping to deprogram people specifically about their relationship to their bodies. So definitely check out her.
Oh, definitely. Sounds great. All right, it's been great talking with you, Anne. A lot of great information. Like I said, when I first started kind of looking into what you did, I was like, wow, she's doing a lot of great things. Plus, you're super funny on your Instagram with your cats. And
thanks. Yep.
I was like,
everywhere.
I was like, I definitely have to meet this person. It was like one of those people where I like to say I totally have a friend crush on them, and I have to meet them. So where can people go online to get more information about everything that you're doing?
Oh, yeah, great question. If you go to Hodder-Shipp.com, and that's HODDERSHIPP, that's my private practice. You can learn about the different kinds of coaching that I offer. And also, EveryoneDeservesSexEd.com is the educational organization that I run, and that's where people sign up for workshops and for groups, as well as I have a sex educator certification. There's a 25-hour training that we offer twice a year, and so there's info on that about that on there too.
Hey, yo, thank you for listening to this episode of Fresh is the Word, hosted and produced by myself, Kelly K. Fresh Frazier, empowered by Anchor at anchor.fm/freshoftheword. Intro theme music by Foulmouth, Shimmy Bango, and Knox Money. Fresh is the Word is available on all major streaming platforms. Please rate and review on Apple Podcasts and Stitcher. If you want to support Fresh is the Word, please consider pledging via Patreon at patreon.com/freshoftheword. Follow Fresh is the Word on social media on Twitter at Fresh is the Pod, on Instagram at Fresh is the Word Podcast, and join the Facebook group at facebook.com/groups/Fresh is the Word. For more information about Fresh is the Word and our other podcasts, Breaking Records and Renaissance Soul, and a collection of pop culture articles and reviews, please visit freshasthepodcast.com. Thank you for listening and your support. Goodbye and good night.
Fresh is the word.